Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
And I'm Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State, and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State, and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. Nick, my friend, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I always love recording.
Excellent. All right. So this episode, we've got the topic of generative AI is disrupting the university. Not assignments, teaching, but the actual institution, its governance model, the structure of the university. And we're going to explore whether the university can act fast enough to make the changes we think it needs to make in a time before it becomes less and less relevant. So I want to tell you a little story going back to 2007-ish. There was a company, BlackBerry. Now, if you're, 40 years and older, you probably remember this company, BlackBerry. They made little handheld computers that were cell phones. They had QWERTY keyboards, fully integrated into the device. People were really into it, texting, writing emails, and there was another company, Palm, that had done the Palm pilot. Well, they had their own version of this, the Trio. But then in January 2007, Steve Jobs got on stage and introduced the first iPhone to the world. And it was pretty clear in that instance, anyone paying attention to technology, that every phone going forward would look similar to an iPhone, that touch screens would eat the world. And sure enough, a few years later, both BlackBerry and Palm totally out of business. Now, the history of capitalism is full of these kinds of stories of disruption, decay, and withering away. And, just to already start some speculation, it seems like the university is potentially in a spot where it needs to innovate and change and think about its core mission and what it's going to offer to stay relevant. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Well, if I've learned anything in my time in higher education is that these institutions are extremely agile and adaptable. So I'm really optimistic about our chances of navigating this.
You want to bet me 100?
Yeah. When I think fast adoption, I think academic senate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Academics are noted for their speed, not. Yeah. So go ahead, Zach.
So we do want to talk about why it is that universities, especially universities like the one that we're at, which is a shared governance model where faculty and staff have a say in what happens. And it's also a collective bargaining campus where all the employees are represented by a different set of unions. But why campuses like ours tend to move a little bit slowly or a lot slowly, depending on your perspective. So we want to talk about that structure a little bit, but rather than just narrating an org chart to you and a bunch of flows, we thought that we'd do that with a little bit of a role play scenario. So in this scenario, Nick is a faculty member in sociology. Nick, do you feel like that's a role you can play?
Yeah, I don't really know those people, but I'll try my best.
You've been faking it for years.
Yeah.
So, and I am the embodiment of a shared governance collective bargaining campus. And Nick has discovered that they need to make some changes to their curriculum. Take it away, Nick.
Hi, I'm not really sure what to do here, but we need to make some curriculum changes, and I'd like to get that process started. So, university, can you help me? Where do I begin?
You can't even talk to me, Nick, because first you have to talk to the curriculum committee in your department. Have you talked to them?
Oh, wait, did they announce something at a department meeting about a position like that? But I don't really know. So you mean I have to go talk to them first?
Yes. First, you have to talk to the curriculum committee in your department. And then you have to the curriculum committee has to talk to the whole department. And so obviously that is incumbent on you to figure out that in the meeting schedule and make sure you work with your department chair and the chair of the curriculum committee to get it on the appropriate schedules.
Okay, so that's good. Hopefully that sounds like that'll be really fast and easy. I'm sure we can get that done pretty quick, right? So, but what happens then? Then we're pretty good to go because if we like it, then everybody likes it, right?
I'm sorry to break this to you, Nick, but then there's also a college curriculum committee, and they have to decide whether or not to take up this particular change. Once they approve it, and that's no certainty because they're also issuing a call to the rest of the campus to say, hey, does this invade on any of your curriculum?
I saw that in my junk folder.
Yes.
Okay, that's the email. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So, and then once they approve it, then the dean has to sign off on it.
Oh, okay. Well, that seems kind of intimidating. But then it's fairly clear after that, because that's the end of the line, right?
But wait, there's more.
Oh,
Depending on the level of curriculum change, then it either has to be approved by the Dean of Undergraduate Education and sometimes by Academic Senate.
right.
The Academic Senate meets every other week,
Okay.
and it's not just Senate. It first has to go to subcommittee, and then it goes to Senate, and each group has to review it twice. So all in all, you're looking at least a couple of months once you get through your college process. But wait, there's more.
Wait, what?
Yes, depending on the level of curriculum change, it may also need to be approved by the Chancellor's office in Long Beach.
Oh, well, they don't have much to do down there, so that can be pretty quick.
They meet on an irregular basis. So, Nick, depending on the level of curriculum change, you're probably looking at a minimum of a year.
Okay, well, that's kind of discouraging. I'm not really sure what to do, but I guess I'll go talk to my colleague over in the next room.
And this segment was brought to you by University Bureaucracy. So that is about how long it takes to make changes, especially curriculum changes, at a collective bargaining shared governance environment. And that's a pretty extreme scenario, but not an uncommon one. I think Nick and I have both been a part of changes that have gone through that process. And 2 years is a pretty standard idea for how long it's going to take, not just before something's official, but before then it's part of the official university catalog.
Yeah,
which is an eternity, right?
It is an eternity. I think that in all seriousness, I've been curriculum chair for a long time, and on at the university level as well. And it's those small minor ones that the amount of time to make the small change before it actually shows up in catalog can take a long time. So across the spectrum, it's very slow, and that's just curriculum. And there's a whole, if you want policy, hey, you got an idea, you want to change policy about the rules and how we govern and things like that, again, expect long wait times for that.
So we just realized that you're actually the crux of the problem here as somebody who's been involved with these committees.
I guess so.
All right. Well, glad we got that sorted. You also did some reading on the outside about universities and risk aversion. Do you want to share a little bit of that?
Yeah, I mean, generally, from my perspective, I do see universities as very conservative, with a small c, slow-moving institutions for lots of good reasons. And I was reading this article. It actually came out a couple of years ago, but I was rereading this article by Mike Kerrigan. And this quote stuck out to me where he was calling, he was basically asking, are universities too slow to respond to AI? And he says, if we don't inquire into how universities respond, there's a parallel risk that we fail to address the practical challenges concerning generative AI that universities are already beginning to grapple with. And just to put a fine point on this, I think that what Kerrigan and what Zach and I have done in some of our writing and speaking is this is why we need to look at the institution itself and focus on not pedagogy, not the teaching, but try to find out what it is about how the organization is structured, governed, and what that says for its future in generative AI environments.
So to highlight some of the places where the pace of change at a university is a little bit of a mismatch for AI, Nick and I are highlighting 4 different areas of institutional adoption and some of the problems that we face with the pace of change at a university. We'll do these one at a time. First one is academic integrity. Obviously, students cheating is not new, and AI makes that easier in some instances. It also kind of scrambles the idea of what cheating even is. But there's an enormous lag with the updating of academic integrity policies. Those things have to move through committees. Eventually, they're approved by Senate and the president of the university. There are changes that we have tried to make to academic integrity at Chico State that are still in process after 2 to 3 years. So it's kind of the same boat as curriculum because there's so many different players in that space. Change is incredibly slow while the technology has moved unbelievably fast.
The other one that we've spoken actually before on the podcast, but it's really important to bring it up here again, is the tenure and promotion process. So the tenure and promotion process itself is time consuming, labor intensive. And there's 2 things I think that the generative AI kind of exposes here. The one is on equity. And the equity of, say, Zach, you're just dumping all your stuff into ChatGPT and pumping out articles, and you've got like 10 pubs in a year, and I'm struggling to teach my classes, and I barely get one out the door. Although we're not supposed to be measured against each other, but we're measured against the standards. Well, clearly you meet the standards much easier than I do. So there's lots of questions there. The other one, though, is about the standards themselves. So I think, again, we just did a redo of our tenure, retention, and promotion documents about 2 years ago, which took at least a year to finalize. And we finally just got our changes in for the final document. But that's actually was done before generative AI. And so now the thought of like, well, when are we going to update that document again? And how is that going to happen? Who's going to take the lead? Those are conversations that are going to take a long time to just get going, let alone to actually implement larger changes to those RTP documents themselves.
And I'm going to jump in with one additional point on that, Nick, which is, and maybe you're too kind to say this, but everybody hates revising those documents.
Oh, yeah.
It's extremely contentious. Nobody wants to do it. So once it's done, everybody's like, oh, thank God we don't have to do that for 10 years.
I was on sabbatical when they did it.
Oh, so, man. Yeah. Well timed.
Yeah, well timed,
sir. The third area is curriculum and assessment. Obviously, we talked about assessment in a previous podcast, but here's an opportunity for us to talk about how this is supposed to work. In an ideal scenario, which we're hardly ever in, you are assessing student learning in a course, in a program of study, and then you're using that to do iterative improvement of that program of study, of that course, of that cluster of courses, whatever it is. But even in a best case scenario, that cycle, you are looking at the assessment data, and then you're spending a year trying to figure out how to change curriculum. Then you're going through that curriculum revision process, and then you're finally implementing it. And then it's another year before you find out, did those changes work in terms of improving the student outcomes? And the harsh truth about this is, regardless of whether or not what we did changed, the world that the students are living in has changed, right? So at that point, we're maybe not even measuring stuff longitudinally. Instead, we're just realizing that suddenly student work is getting a lot better, but it's because they have access to these incredibly powerful technological tools that they didn't have access to a few years ago. So not only does it make that data kind of silly, but it also means that we just aren't getting that information in time to make the kind of changes that we probably need to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue into our fourth disruption around writing proficiency. And this is really hard because our friends and colleagues over in English and writing intensive programs are really feeling the pain on this because they value writing to the core as a core good in education and learning and in society. But clearly, we have a technology that's a writing machine, and students are using that, whether in part or in whole. It really upends the ideas about what does it mean to be proficient in writing. Is it really worth a skill to have? Is that what universities should be designed around, is about improving writing? Now, there's lots of debates on that. And I think one of the things that when I went and looked into this is that our writing proficiency policies date all the way back to the 1970s, before I was born. And so talk about the slow university. We're still using policies that guide our core competencies that date back to before computers were invented or at the mass market scale. So that's a big one as well.
So those are four areas, and obviously there are others, but those are four ones at the institutional level where there's a mismatch in between the pace of change and the change that is demanded because of artificial intelligence. There is hope, though, and the hopes comes to us in an unusual example from a relatively unpleasant place, and that's COVID. In reflecting on this, Nick and I have talked a lot about how COVID showed us that we actually can move fast. Before COVID, getting approval for moving a course of study online, again, years and debates in the making. Instead, the whole university got propped up. We're all going to teach online. We've got 2 weeks. Let's go. And that's not to say that we all did it well. There was a lot of stuff that was uneven, but it showed that when we need to throw resources at a problem and come up with a way to do rapid change, suddenly we're all doing online instruction. And a lot of us figured out some really clever ways to do that we did not expect. Other stuff that happened during COVID. tenure clocks were paused. I mean, oh my God, can you imagine trying to enter into negotiations in between the CFA and the bargaining teams from the CSU and any other environment, and everybody just coming together and being like, yeah, this is really bad. Let's just pause everything for 2 years and then we'll get back to it later. I mean, you would have been run out of the room if you would have suggested that in any other context, but they came together and got it done in weeks. New policies were adopted overnight, and the one that I always point to as a model for rapid change is, as we were coming out of COVID, there were a lot of questions about what mode of instruction different courses were going to be in. Oh, was this going to be hybrid, entirely online, or in person? And before, those were some of the most arduous changes on campus. And in some cases, approval for those didn't even stop at the chancellor's office. It had to go all the way to our accrediting body, which was WASC. And instead, during that 1 year period when we were transitioning back, all of that got cut out. And instead, the approval process was email your dean. If they say it's okay, then it's okay. And that was it. And sure, stuff gets lost in the process about that, right? But nothing catastrophic happened during that process. And we got through it. And I think it also showed us that when we really recognize the exigency of a situation, we can make rapid change. And while this is not the same thing as COVID, there is a similar exigency. We have to move quick.
And I think pivoting on that or building from that really is what happens if we don't respond? What happens to universities in the medium to long term? And I think there's a lot of unpleasant potentials, kind of hearkening back to the BlackBerry situation where, rapid changes in the market or in people's attention or in people's interests can suddenly change the fate of institutions that at one moment looked like they were going to endure for quite a long time. And I think the university, because it's been around a long time, here I'm speaking of the university in the abstract, most of us have this assumption it's just a facet of life. It's just it's actually part of the pre-modern and modern world. And it'll just kind of go on. But what if it doesn't? What if it's in its crisis period where we need to clearly recognize that these disruptions, the ones we mentioned and others, are severe enough that the continuation of the university as we knew it is in jeopardy. And so I think, we have multi-crises coming in, right? It's not just generative AI. We've got enrollment cliffs. We've got, in California, we have budget crises for public universities. We've got politicization and attacks from the left and the right. These are all happening at the same time. It makes the university very insecure, very vulnerable. At the same time, it needs to be flexible and innovative and kind of like redo its mission statement, basically. Make a pitch to, I'll just say for the people of California, the CSU, from faculty all the way up, have to kind of re-articulate its vision. Right, so we could also imagine a world where students, where do they want to spend their money? Where do they want to spend their time? Is this the place to do it? Could they just do these things elsewhere? So on that dark vision though, Zach, what could we do to avoid some of this, or at least steer our universities in different directions?
Yeah, well, it does require a total institutional effort. And again, it has to move fast. And we have seen this happen, and not in distant memory, but in recent memory. So at a lot of institutions, enrollment is a real challenge, and obviously that has an impact on budget. But there's been this pivot in the last few years where enrollment has become everybody's job, right? Like, so it's something that how to retain students becomes a topic that you talk about in department meetings. You go to workshops about it. You are assigned work to do that you have never had to do before, right? Like, I've been a professor here for 16 years, but it's only in the last couple of years that part of my job has been, you're going to call or text students that have been admitted to this program of study and let them know that you're here to answer any questions for them. And it's because enrollment is all of a sudden everybody's job. So we know that these sort of like total institutional shifts can happen when there is the energy and resources put into it. And we also know that we can move fast when it is that we need to. But the first thing is we have to recognize I don't want to say the existential threat, but the how rapid this landscape is changing. And maybe it is the BlackBerry situation. Maybe we do need to think about it in threat terms to the solvency of the campus itself. Maybe that's what gets us to move fast.
Possibly, yeah. And there are examples real quickly of early adopters. So there are institutions that are trying to become more flexible and adaptive. We think of Arizona, even the CSU is the CSU Systems partnership with OpenAI. I was just reading the other day a piece about the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management, where sort of at a decentralized model, this school built their own AI teaching assistant bot, basically, and began integrating it, and actually found that they had a lot of success in student outcomes and learning and engagement with the material. So clearly there are some examples of universities tinkering, trying, and moving in different directions.
I don't want to be too cute and try and tie all this together, but for my money, I'm betting that is related to, or possibly related to, enrollment too. We know there's tons of student anxiety about the viability of their degree in a world that's being impacted by artificial intelligence, and we can link to some of those studies in the show notes. But I think that when you express to students like, hey, we're taking this seriously, we're incorporating this into curriculum, it makes students feel more confident that what they're learning and the degree that they're earning is going to be viable moving forward.
Yeah. So I think that's our take this episode on the slow university and its path through the disruption of generative AI. And just to cap this off, it doesn't have to be this way, right? Not everything has to take a year. Some documents can be living and not static. And it doesn't have to be a top-down, right? We can empower local decision makers at the university and units to make these kind of decisions.
Nick, I think our final segment is bad analogy, and I believe that is yours. But is it a bad analogy?
Well, I think we're going to find out. So let me pitch it to you, Zach. Okay, recently I was on the podcast Teach Smarter with Stephanie Denon and Pete Seiner. Great episode, great time with them. Near the end of our conversation, Stephanie said something like, "Excuse my bad analogy, but I have one about the modern university." We were actually talking about the slow university at that time. So, of course, my ears picked up and I was like, bad analogy. Come on, please. I didn't let that on because I didn't tell them that we were in developing a podcast at the time. Can't wait to share it with them. But so here's her analogy. She described the modern university like an aging glam star from 50 years ago who wakes up each morning and cakes on the makeup, heads out strutting like they're 20 years old while the rest of the world gawks. Pete jumped in to say, yeah, like the 7-year-old gray-haired man who dyes his beard brown. These are really vivid analogies. What do you think? Good? Bad analogy?
Well, I hope it's a bad analogy because I don't want us to be that. I mean, I've gone to some shows with some aging pop stars. I went to a Rolling Stones concert when I was a teenager, and I was sure that was going to be like their last tour because Mick Jagger was ancient. It turns out he's even more ancient now, yeah. Still touring. But I don't want us to be that. I don't want us to pretend to be something that we're not. I want us to be different.
Yeah, I agree. I have the exact same sentiment, but Stephanie, that was a great analogy. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and connect with us on Blue Sky at meltsintoair.bsky.social and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nick Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.